Welcome, everyone, to the Commercial Real Estate 101 podcast. Excited to see you all this fine afternoon. For those of you guys who are tuning in for the first time, we started this podcast back in 2020 to kind of become the watering hole for commercial real estate content and information. And today we have a phenomenal guest, someone that I've actually followed quite some time on different social platforms. He always has some great insights on single tenant net lease investment properties, and he's a top broker out in LA for Marcus Millichap. Tyler Bindi, great to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me on. It's an honor and a pleasure. Excited to be here.
Definitely, absolutely, man. So it's really cool to see what you're doing out in your market, and obviously you transact all across the country. So I'm really interested to hear your take on investment sales and just the commercial real estate brokerage career as a whole. But what we typically like to do when we first get started is to learn a little bit more about the person that we're speaking with. So if you don't mind kind of sharing a little bit about your backstory, I think that'd be great.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Northern California in San Jose. Went to school up there at St. Mary's College, which is known best probably for their basketball program. But I
Mm-hmm.
played baseball there, which no one cares about. And immediately after school, I moved to Denver, Colorado. Worked for the Rockies baseball team, selling season tickets, which at the time I thought would be an awesome foot in the door to become an on-air broadcaster.
Mm-hmm.
As a 22-year-old kid, I shortly found out that that is not how you get your foot in the door to be on air selling tickets. But through that, I learned that I love sales.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, the timing kind of worked out where COVID hit in 2020. The baseball season hit pause, so there were no tickets to be sold. And I'd always wanted to get into real estate. And so that kind of triggered my move down to Los Angeles, a place that I'd always wanted to live and join an industry that I always wanted to be in. The timing was questionable for sure, with
Yeah.
basically everything shut down and no one going into a physical office. But looking back on it, if I didn't do it then, I don't know if I would have ever made the jump. So I guess I'm glad I did. And, looking back almost 6 years later now, it's crazy how fast the time went by.
Oh my God, yeah. And people always refer to COVID, and you really think about it, it's been 6 years now. And it seems like it's been very, very recent, but it's not. It's been that long. And I too started around the same time you did in the commercial real estate brokerage business. So it is it's one of those industries that at least for me was one that I didn't even ever consider getting into. It just so happened to be one that researched and thought it would kind of fit my personality, and ultimately decided to take the leap. I mean, what was the impetus for you to want to get into commercial real estate specifically? Was that something maybe you knew other people in that business in San Jose, and you kind of always, you know, inspired by those individuals, or was it just something that you kind of fell into your lap over, your period of time where you're researching other opportunities?
It's a good question. And it's funny because I really wanted to do residential real estate. That's all I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do. And I wanted to sell houses. And I thought that was the coolest thing. It was my old manager when I was selling tickets for the Rockies. When told him I was leaving, I told him I was going to sell houses. And, before I left, the last thing he said was like, you should look into this commercial real estate thing. I think that could be a better niche for you. I had no idea what commercial real estate did. Like so little knowledge. I was like, okay, office buildings. I mean, I guess that's interesting, but I know nothing about that. Um, so I briefly moved back from Denver to San Jose at the time while I was getting my real estate license. And I talked to my grandfather who owns one commercial property. And he put me in touch with his broker. And he's like, why don't you shadow this guy for a day, see what his day looks like, and, maybe you like it. And so I went to San Francisco to shadow this guy in his office. And after like 30 minutes, I was instantly hooked. This guy like was taking phone call after phone call every 30 seconds. And there was the swearing and the deal making and the golf simulator in the office. And I was like, this guy's the absolute man. I want to be this guy. Um, and so after that, my focus completely shifted. And I was like, okay, let's figure out what commercial real estate is, and then started studying, took my test, and interviewed basically with any national firm that would have me. Um, and then had that steep learning curve when I started out in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. So walk us through that period, because I think that, you talk about your having mirrored this person, realizing that, I mean, it seems like you're a deal junkie, which is great. I mean, that's literally the entrepreneurial drive that you have. You saw someone that was exercising that, and you decided, this is the area that I want to focus in. You started interviewing with all these different national firms, and for those of you guys who are listening, obviously there's many of you who are already in brokerage, so you understand it's a commission only business, so it can be quite difficult, especially in the early stages of your career. So maybe talk us through, onboarding at Marcus Millichap, and then tell us a little bit about, the starting point of your career. So maybe the
Mhm.
first year in business and how you were able to navigate those tumultuous times.
For sure. Yeah. So for me, ended up at Marcus and Millichap, moved down to LA, which in hindsight was kind of stupid. I probably should have stayed and lived with my parents for a little bit, but I really didn't understand the whole 100% commission thing in the
Hmm.
sense that, people tell you, hey, there's a good chance you don't make any money for a year, maybe year and a half, 2 years. I go, okay, that's great. Maybe you didn't, but I'll be different. Um, and so that confidence and stupidity caused me to move down to LA, get an apartment, while everyone back home, called me an idiot, which I was. Um, and then got paired up with, a senior mentor down here. Interviewed with him at his house because the office wasn't open, and you know, didn't know anything about a triple net lease at the time. Like, wanted to sell apartment buildings because I was living in an apartment and kind of understood what that meant. But then when he told me, there's actually, landlords for properties like Walgreens and 7-Eleven and Chick-fil-A, that kind of opened my mind to, wow, okay, I, wasn't even scratching the surface of, you know, what this avenue of commercial real estate meant. So, office buildings didn't excite me, apartments didn't excite me, but this, I was like, okay, so now I can travel all over the country, meet with these different owners and developers, and talk about retail, which I've always been passionate about. Um, and so for me, I thought, okay, great. I'm passionate about this. I'm going to work as hard as anyone. I'll get a quick paycheck. And that did not happen at all. Um, and it took me about a year until I closed my first deal. And that luckily kind of barely kept me in the game.
Yeah. No. So, tell us a little bit about some of the activity that you were doing early on, and maybe some of the lessons learned throughout that early stage of your career, because, you're working at the national firm. You have reach really all across the country. I'm sure you talk to owners all over the country. I'm here locally in my market, Louisville, Kentucky, and we operate somewhat regionally. So a lot of the conversations we're having are with people who own property locally. So tell us a little bit about that, your particular experience regarding
Mhm.
having those conversations with people all across the country. And oftentimes these people are probably pretty sophisticated, and so how do you bridge the gap of knowledge there?
Yeah, great question. And like you said, it is a little different what I do versus what most people do working a national product. And so when I first started, you know, a lot of the business I was going after and eventually doing was outside of California, Texas, Florida, southeastern markets. And I quickly realized, these people are 3 hours ahead of me you know, on their time zone. And by the time I call them at, 9 a.m. or whatever, they're already at lunch, like wrapping up their day. And so I figured, okay, I got to change something. This is not working. So let me get in the office at 5:30 a.m. and I'll start calling the East Coast at 6 a.m. when it's 9 a.m. their time. Then I'll slowly work my way back from, the Floridas. I'll go to Central Time and do, Texas. And then towards the end of the day, I'll move to the Western states. And that was kind of how I time blocked my days. It was by time zone. And I figured I could kind of fast track my learning that way. I'm going to talk to more people. I'll be in the office more. Because, like, what you said is completely true. A lot of these people I'm calling are not mom and pop owners, they're developers, they're operators, and they've been doing it for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and I've been doing it for 5 minutes. So what am I gonna have to offer them, right? Um, and so for me, I approached every call as, I'm gonna learn something from this person. I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to learn one piece of information that I can take from this person, then use it on my next call so I can sound smarter to this next person. And it just became a total information gathering business where I was striking out left and right every single listing opportunity that I was competing against with the same probably 5 top brokers. I would lose every time. Like my first year, I did 56 broker opinion of values, lost every single one. No one has had a track record. I mean, if I was a baseball player, I would be out of the lineup instantly. But in brokerage, the cool thing is, a lot of those relationships compound. And maybe I missed out on that opportunity my first year, but by the time year 3 and year 5 rolled around, where I've developed a relationship with this person, they know now that I know my stuff and I'm doing deals. Like that first BOV I did in 2020 may not have paid out at all, but now today in 2026, it's a great friendship I've made with a client. And so that learning curve was brutal, but it was really call volume. Whenever I had something happen on a call that I didn't understand or an objection I couldn't overcome, I would role play it with my senior or my team. It was just constantly honing in on that craft day after day, uh, which is not fun to get rejected on 100 cold calls in a day. Um, my first day in the office, I remember it so vividly. It was July 2nd, 2020. I made my first cold call. Everyone was out for the 4th of July. It was a Friday. I made 100 cold calls. Only 2 people answered. The first person basically told me to F off and never call him again, which was, rightfully so. The second person, you know, was a sweet old lady, probably in her 90s, that ended up being one of my first listings about a year later. So, like, you just never know in this business who you're going to talk to, who you're going to meet, and that's one of the cooler things, and I think why a lot of us do this.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think it's Kyle Matthews who said that he didn't make any money his first year, but he really made $1 million his first year because he
Right.
built that foundation, built those relationships, built the skills that ultimately led him to becoming a top agent in the business and now starting such a successful firm on his own. So, putting in the time, showing the grit, putting in the work is ultimately how you get there in the long run. So tell us a little bit about that. The day in the life. You talked about call blocking. So you got in at 5:30 in the morning. You made your calls from East Coast to West Coast, and then after that period of time, I mean, I'm assuming that would take you quite a bit of time. What does
Yeah.
your day look like typically? Is it the calls, and then afterwards you're doing research? How are you handling that
Yeah. Yeah.
process?
Yeah. Good question. And that was basically it. It was, the night before really set up the morning after. So
Mhm.
I would stay pretty late and kind of line up my call list for the next day. And I would try to have at least 50 people on that list. And I would call them once, ideally in the morning and then once later in the day. And try and make sure, maybe a slightly smaller list, but call them twice and hopefully get them on the phone. So I'm calling from, call it 6 a.m. West Coast time, take a 15-minute break, pack my lunch, always something from Trader Joe's I could put down quick and then get back to calling, and then try to stop calling around 5 p.m. Pacific time, and then from 5 p.m. to call it usually around 8 to 9 p.m. I was going back through my database, going through every single person that had an incorrect number, trying to find the right number, and then researching some sort of valuable information that I could use to call these people tomorrow. Some interest generator that I could tell them that another broker has not told them yet. An example was my first ever listing. I called some guy that owned a Dunkin' Donuts in Florida. And I remember the night before, I had found an article about how Dunkin' was acquired by Inspire Brands. And this article laid out a bunch of information about why this transaction was important, what it's going to do for the brand. And I just read it, 5, 6, 7 times. So I knew it like the back of my hand. And when I was calling all of these owners and giving them this information, it was like they'd heard it for the first time. And in their minds, they were like, Tyler Bindi knows what the heck he's talking about. And even though that particular person didn't want to sell that day, a year later, I was the first person he thought of. Calls me, Tyler, it's Dave. We spoke a while back. I'm ready to sell. Like, awesome. Like that was my first listing. Just came from that. And that was because I set it up the night before at 8:30 p.m. when all my friends were at the bar hanging out on a Thursday night, and I was sitting in the office, miserable at the time. It ended up paying off and saving my butt.
Yeah. No, I mean, and to your point, you created something that was of value to the people that you're speaking with, because I can imagine many of these landlords or owners are probably getting called constantly by people. So you have to find a way to stand out amongst the noise, and by you taking the extra time to understand the implications of the sale of that particular brand. It showed case to those individuals that you were someone who was up to date on things that were going on, and obviously that's you're it's all about creating value, and in your case you did, and hopefully that also helped you convey a messaging to prospective buyers about what the value is for this particular building or brand based on what has happened in the marketplace already. So it's a two-way street. So
Absolutely. It's funny. I think, it took me, and I calculated it, was over 15,000 cold calls to get my first listing, that property I just mentioned in Florida. It took me one cold call to sell it, like you said, because
yeah.
after the first 15,000 calls, I knew who the exact perfect buyer would be.
Hmm.
And I knew exactly how to pitch it to them. I knew the entire story. And so, when people say brokers are overpaid, you just made this commission check by making one phone call. It's like, no, I just spent a year making 15,000 phone calls and becoming an expert in this market to sell your deal at the highest price possible.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's important to note too. Like, it wasn't a lucky phone call to sell this deal. It was a year of pain and suffering to be able to sell that deal.
Definitely. No, so talk to us a little bit about that information gathering piece. So you mentioned that article. Do you typically subscribe to QSR magazine or other different platforms and dedicate your time to making sure you keep up to date on these different brands? Because to your point, with it being single tenant net lease investments, I mean, you're trading all different types of businesses, whether that's pharmacies or restaurants, or now urgent cares are becoming much more prevalent. So kind of curious about your experience there. So
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the toughest things being a single tenant broker nationwide is keeping up with all of the news because if you miss one piece of information, you can sound like an idiot in a meeting. If you don't know what just happened to this urgent care brand or this car wash brand and who acquired them, and you go into a meeting without knowing that, it's not going to be good for your business. And so what you said, I like QSR Magazine is a great one. I am subscribed to a stupid amount of website subscriptions where at 5 a.m. every morning, which it seems like that's when all of them send out their daily newsletters, my inbox just gets flooded. And so that's what I'll do usually after the gym or while I'm getting ready in the morning. I'll read through some of those articles and just get ready for the day. So I at least start working on mentally what is happening and what I can use in my meetings coming up that day. And the other thing is just constantly, every morning when I get into the office and every night before I go home, the first and last thing I do is I'm going on CoStar, LoopNet, Crexy, Marcus and Millichap's internal platform, just looking at every single new listing and every single new closing, just because it is so invaluable to understand your market. And it takes a lot of time when you're covering all 50 states and all of these different brands. So to your point, that is another full-time job in itself, keeping updated.
definitely, yeah, no. So tell us so now you kind of described the evolution of where you started to then taking your first listing, and now you've gotten into a point where you're trading properties and making transactions all across the nation. How do you manage the systems? Because obviously, when you first get started, I mean, you have to focus 100% on business development. And
Mhm.
now you've got all these different listings and countervailing responsibilities. How have you been able to kind of orchestrate the systems around what you're doing now?
Yeah, few years ago, like you said, when you first start out and you're doing one listing at a time, you can do that on your own, right?
Hmm.
It's all you have going on. But when you start scaling up and doing more volume, and especially in the single tenant space where it really is a volume game, like my goal this year is to sell 100 properties. You can't do that on your own. Like you're
Yeah.
gonna
No.
You're gonna kill yourself. You just can't, put in that much time and give each listing the amount of attention that it needs to actually sell and give the owner the attention that they need. So probably 2.5, 3 years ago, I started to build a team, and that really evolved my efforts. And it was a very scary leap to take at first when you're bringing on, employees on your team, junior agents on your team. That was the scariest thing for me because I had total imposter syndrome. I was just the 23-year-old kid that didn't know what a cap rate was. And now 2 years later, I have all these people that are depending on me and want to work for me and want me to mentor them. Um, and so, it was a real conversation that I had to have with my regional manager. And he said, at a certain point, dude, if you want to scale this, you've got to trust yourself and you need to build this out, or else you're always going to be the guy that sells 10 properties a year. If you want that, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can make a great living doing that. But if you want to be a top agent in the country, you need to scale this. And so that came with, hiring an admin, hiring an analyst, hiring a marketing team, bringing on 5 junior agents, an account executive, and just people that I could lean on for, I don't have time to call on each of my 40 to 50 listings every day, but I have other people on my team that I can say, "Hey, we need to touch this listing. Here's a list of 50 people, call them." Right? Let's move the ball downfield. Let's send these owners an update every 2 weeks. When we have a listing with them, they get a report every 2 weeks with the activity, who we've called, how many emails were sent, what the response has been, what the objections has been. Like, these owners know that we are giving their listing the attention it deserves, because if you're not, you're just throwing it up on the internet and praying a buyer comes to you, um, which we can't have.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, then that's why a lot of these owners are going with you because of the way that you're approaching the process of getting their property sold for top dollar. And so if you can showcase, the systems that you've implemented to be able to make that happen, then obviously that's a unique selling proposition. You've got to hold up that end of the bargain. And yeah, tell us a little bit about that evolution. Like, what was the how was the initial process of onboarding an admin and then trying to get them up to speed while you're having to juggle all these different responsibilities? Because I think that's a lot of things. That's a challenge that a lot of people hit when they start to get to a point where they're making enough money to where they could maybe justify onboarding an admin, but then they're somewhat they have reservations about it because they're just like, well, man, if I have to do that, I have to train them and try to get them up to
Mhm.
speed and all this other stuff. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts about how you were able to navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough thing, and especially, a lot of brokers are total control freaks, and
Hmm.
it's very tough to give up control of their baby, their
Yeah.
business, which they've, put so much effort into, and then you're kind of passing off some of the very important responsibilities to an admin. And so, it was a very extensive interview process, and, me and my partner, Jason Pfeffer, probably went through 50 different applicants to make sure that we had the right person, because we're like, this is a team member, a family member, someone that's going to be with us uh, a lot of hours a week, and we want to make sure that we trust this person with this business that we've built. Um, but it's tough, Most brokers get into the business because they're salespeople, right? They're good at sales, not because they're a good CEO or manager of a business, right? And that's something that I never really wanted to do. I want to do sales. I want to get deals. I want to sell deals. I didn't get into this to be the CEO of a team or the leader
Hmm.
of a team. I don't know how to do that, right? So it was definitely a learning curve. And it's been one of the more rewarding experiences that I've done in my fairly young life, is kind of now growing and leading this team and being able to help other people grow. And, um, you know, looking back on it, probably the best decision we've ever made is to take some of those responsibilities off our plate so that we can focus on what we do best. And for me, at least, that's business development. That's flying across the country to meet with owners and shake hands and have dinners and, work with countless new people each year that I get FaceTime with because I have the time to do that, because I'm not doing some of the admin work or the marketing work and stuff like that, which my team crushes behind the scenes for me so that I have time to do that.
Yeah, you let them operate in their zone of genius, and you focus in on what you're excellent at, and over time, everyone benefits because rising tide kind of lifts all boats.
Absolutely.
That's amazing, man. So tell us a little bit about, obviously the reason I reached out to you is because you do an excellent job of kind of conveying what you do online. Obviously you have a Twitter or X, I guess, account. You've now are super active on LinkedIn. I've seen many of your all's videos regarding, different listings you all are looking to sell that are fun and creative, and you incorporate, this QSR, these QSR concepts. So I'm kind of curious as to what made you decide to have at least some form of presence in that medium, and if you could establish or elaborate a little bit on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's funny, I never had social media, even as a kid.
Hmm.
Never had it on my phone, was never active at all, and then it was really about, you know, I think 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, um, our retail department at Marcus and Millichap had a webcast with Don Tepman, strip mall guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he kinda came on and talked to us not only about retail, but also what he was doing on social media, and it instantly struck a chord with me. I was like, "This guy is actually getting business because he posts on Twitter and on LinkedIn." Just written content, and half of it's just kind of funny. Half of it is just stuff that people in the industry relate to and find interesting. And he said it himself. He's like, "I don't post anything special. It's just relatable and what I find interesting on my day-to-day life." And I'll never forget it. On that call, he said, "If you post twice a day for a year, your life is going to absolutely change when you look back on it." And so after that, I said, "All right, let me sign up and fire up the old LinkedIn and the old Twitter at the time, and just start posting my thoughts." That's really how it started. And half of it was kind of joking and unserious, and half of it was deal stories of, you know, an interesting deal that someone might be able to learn from or find interesting. And it took off pretty quickly. And it went from having, 0 followers to, a few thousand and growing constantly. And then people would reach out and say, "I really enjoy reading your content. You're a great, voice for the industry." I'm not a voice for anything. I just, I'm just posting on X.
Mm-hmm.
And then it evolved, and I would go to these conferences, like the ICSCs of the world, and people would come up to me and say, "I love your content online." And so I figured in my head after about a year of doing that, this needs to become an actual part of my business plan, right? As much as I love cold calling, the ability to reach all of these people with a single post is very unique and at the time very untapped. And that's where some of the videos started to come in. And it was initially an idea, a crazy idea, where me and my partner, Jason Pfeffer, were going to do this crazy, we called it the triple net road trip. And we were going to drive from Los Angeles, rent a U-Haul, and end up in New York City. A 30-day triple net road trip. And we were going to meet with a new owner every single day. And we realized very quickly that was going to be expensive and that was going to take us out of the office. And so we nixed it. And then I said, okay, if we can't do something that crazy, let's at least post some videos at these fast food properties, see how it goes. And the first one we ever did was at a Popeyes near Compton in Los Angeles. So for those of you that have maybe never been to LA or know about it, Compton's not an awesome area, um, especially not one you want to be in after dark. And so we filmed this video of us with a Popeyes behind us, and totally unplanned. On the way there bought, a table to sit at and chairs to sit at, and we're just going by the seat of our pants. But we thought it would be kind of fun and interesting. So we have our camera set up on a tripod, just an iPhone. We're filming us talking about the Popeyes new chicken wings. I think it was the new chicken wings. Then all of a sudden behind us, these random Popeyes customers pop out and they start dancing in the background. One guy holds up his Rolex in the camera, and we finish the video and go, "Wow, that was crazy. I guess we'll just post it." And it took off, and everyone said this is the funniest thing ever. And 2 years later, we're still cranking out those videos, and people are still enjoying them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it all started with just a conversation with Don Tepman, who is a strip mall guy for you guys who are listening. Kind of telling you, hey, all it takes is just being consistent about something for a period of time, and you've already been extremely consistent in business development and the way that you've approached your business. So incorporating something like that was probably pretty straightforward. Just kind of implementing it into your day to day. And so regarding those videos, I mean, are you distributing them based on just different brands that you all are representing, or are these actual listings that you guys have that are you're marketing? So it's kind of like a dual
Sure.
approach.
So some of them are our listings. A lot of them are just whatever is topical,
Hmm.
usually in the fast food space.
Hmm.
Um, because what we sell is so spread out across the country. Usually, if breaking news comes out about McDonald's, we can't fly to our McDonald's listing in Houston, Texas. We've done videos like that just because we're visiting the property and we're like, well, we might as well take a video while we're here. But a
Yeah.
lot of times it's just, all right, let's go find a Starbucks.
Yeah.
Let's go find some fast food restaurant where hopefully there's not any homeless people out here. Hopefully it's got a big parking lot. We
Hmm.
scouted out beforehand. We have to talk to the manager and get the okay. And it's very, very planned. Um, and I think that's why they do decently well because it's something kind of unique and it looks like it's trying to be professional, but really it's just two, you know, brokers acting like they're newscasters.
Yeah. No, I think that's part of the allure about him is that it's just two guys that are pretty relatable that are obviously presenting great information, but you can tell that you're not taking yourself too
Right.
seriously and you're really just trying to create something that's enjoyable for people to engage with. And a byproduct of that is that people who watch it in particular, if they're operating in that space, remember your name because again, we're in the business of being known. So if you can have all these different areas that you're touching prospective clients, whether that's the cold calling, whether that's the engaging on X or LinkedIn or having these videos that you distribute on all these different platforms. It's just you inundate people with who you are and what you know, and ultimately over a long time it leads to business. So um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like, my business is, every month I'll have 1 or 2 conferences that I'll fly to, and I'll go
mhm,
meet with, either prospects or clients. And now, probably 70 to 80% of the time, the people will sit down with me and they'll feel like they know me
yeah,
already before I even get into the room because they've been watching my videos and reading my content for 2 years. Versus, like, before that, it would just be the coldest meeting of all time. And I got so, like, upset with that, and the ability to shift that very cold introduction into now what feels like a warm introduction. And I'll have people come up to me and say, "Hey, I saw your videos. I really like it. Like, let's grab a drink, whatever. Let's talk." Awesome. And even more so than that, with the prospecting and actually getting deals, it's been building my team. 3 out
mhm,
of the 4 junior agents on my team, found me on social media. And, the amount of inbound applications and resumes that I'll get emailed to me on a weekly basis is so cool. Um, that these people found me from social media. Um, and I think that's kind of the direction that this industry is going, I hope,
mhm.
um, is more of that quality content from brokers to grow their business and grow their teams. Because what you said is so true. It really is who knows you. And a lot of times the broker with the biggest megaphone is going to win.
Definitely. No, I couldn't agree more, man. Really. So, one thing I'm also curious about is, with all these different technology advancements, we're talking social media being a growing piece of a lot of people's business. Are there any other technologies or anything that you guys are incorporating? I know obviously AI has become very hot topic, and there's different tools out there that are really cool to be able to potentially incorporate. I'm just kind of curious if you've
Mhm.
had any thoughts or have incorporated any of those tools into your business?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely used AI to make our lives easier.
Mhm.
Your Chat GPTs, your Claudes. I think, you know, Terracotta AI is a cool tool for
Yeah.
dialing and making phone calls. And there's a bunch that we're testing out in terms of databasing and finding owners' contact info. I think the tough thing is there's just so much out there right now. And I have a good friend, Jake Heller,
Mhm.
that has an awesome site that kind of breaks down, what's working, what's not working. Here's real world examples of what I've tried and how it's gone. And I talk to so many brokers that are just like, you know, so unfocused and trying to do so much AI. And I think AI is awesome, but the nuts and bolts of what we're doing here, at least, AI hasn't made a huge difference. I mean, it's saved us a lot of time, which I think is the biggest thing. But when I get, the opportunity to value someone's property, I'm not putting the address in ChatGPT and it's giving me a price. It's like, okay, you have a Starbucks in this area. Let me look at every single Starbucks that's sold in the last 6 months. And now let me look at every single one that's on market in these areas. And I'm going to use my brain and my analysis and my experience to tell you, hey, this is where I think you should list yours. This is how we can outposition ours versus these other six that are very similar. And like until AI gets to a place where it takes that step out of the equation, you know, it hasn't made the most meaningful difference in my business, but it definitely has helped us, I think, save time,
Mhm.
increase velocity. But I don't have any magic, I guess, tips and tricks that I'm doing that others probably aren't already.
No, and I think that's a very insightful thing you said. I mean, there's definitely pieces of the process that can be streamlined by AI. I mean, a lot of the admin, there's different admin tasks or whatever other things that aren't necessarily focused in on the nuts and bolts of what you do on a day to day. I'll also wager to say with the BOVs as an example. I mean, you're having done the research and coming up with that conclusion on your own makes it easier for you to convey that value proposition to a
Absolutely.
client because if you don't do that work and then you show up and you have this report that looks all great, but then you start getting into the weeds because clients are going to ask you these types of questions and you can't respond in a meaningful way, then obviously that doesn't do you any favors either. So it's one of those things where I think you do that's the right way to approach the process. And I wouldn't necessarily think AI would be, best served to fix that or not fix, but to
Yeah,
streamline that particular process because you still need to have that knowledge to be able to convey that value proposition to your client. So um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I appreciate that. So, what advice would you give? And what typically do is I like to say is we like to ask questions, and at the end we usually open up to Q&A. So for those of you guys who are listening, we have a few more questions, and then go ahead and type away in the chat box in the meantime, so we can make sure we get to the questions that you all have. So, you know, regarding your timeline, obviously you've had a pretty huge trajectory over the last 5 years. You've grown your business to a great degree. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? Like what other thresholds do you want to achieve in that time frame?
The first one I want to achieve is selling 100 properties in 1 year, the century
Mhm.
mark. That's goal
Yeah,
number one.
century mark. I
Um,
like that.
the next one, um, I want to grow a massive team and hire a bunch of young, hungry agents that I and my partners enjoy being around and that we can grow together. I think it's really cool. It really started, as just me. And then I brought on, a partner and now a bunch of team members that I love working with. And for us, one of our main, criteria when we're hiring someone is, would I want to grab a drink with this person? And if the answer is no, then it's not going to be a fit because you're going to be in the war room with these people for 60 to 80 hours a week. So um, I want to hire more people that I like working with and make time in the office more enjoyable. I want to attend as many conferences as possible. That's my goal every year, and it's always increasing the amount of conferences and owners that we're meeting with. So in 5 years, I don't know where I'll be. I don't have like an income goal or anything like that, or a deal goal past 100 in a year. But I just want to keep growing this team out, growing this brand out, and part of that brand is social media. And so we have some really creative ideas that we're excited to roll out on social media to hopefully keep increasing that brand recognition and keep raising the awareness for our group so we can keep doing more deals and helping more owners.
That's amazing, man. Those are great goals, and I think the fact the goal you have of hitting 100 a whole 100 units per year. I mean, there's so many different pieces of the puzzle that you have to complete to get to that point to where it's going to keep you busy. And obviously, once that goal is achieved, you got the next goal that you're going to set for yourself. So, I don't necessarily believe that you have to have everything kind of mapped out for 5 to 10 years, because you just kind of keep moving the goalpost, and I think that's the important piece. So one last question before we open up the Q&A. For those of you guys who are listening that are newer, for those who are listening that are kind of newer in the business or just getting their feet wet, what advice would you give to those people to make sure that they put themselves in a position to potentially become a top investment sales broker over the next few years?
One of the biggest pieces of advice would be just to not compare yourself to everyone else around you.
Mhm.
That was the biggest thing I struggled with when I first started. I would see all of these senior agents around me making so much money, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to afford rent at the time and struggling with that. And then, and everyone goes through this where you have a training class of agents that you're with, people that are just starting out. And then, your buddy will get their first deal and they'll close it and they'll make some money. And you're like, gosh, dang it. Why couldn't that have been me? Right. You're not happy for them. You're upset that it wasn't you. And
Mhm.
it's so hard to do, but you just try and be as excited as you can for your teammates, your partners, because eventually, what you said earlier is true. A rising tide is going to lift all ships. And I remember like 4 months into my first year, I started working with a guy who's now my best friend. And he got this crazy $60 million deal, closed it, and it was a massive, ungodly commission check that he got as a 24-year-old kid. And, you know, looking back on it, I wish I was way more excited for him instead of being bummed that it wasn't me, because you can drive yourself absolutely crazy looking at others' success and wondering why it's not yours, because this business is so unbelievably hard that, you know, if you do it for 3 months and say, "Why haven't I gotten a deal?" you're going to struggle. Give it at least a year, look back at what you've done, and hopefully at that point, you're close enough where quitting is not an option, right? The worst thing I see people do, and it drives me crazy and it is so upsetting, is when people quit after a year when they were right on the cusp of breaking through. And I've seen so many case stories of it. Um, and it sucks. So I would say give yourself time, don't compare yourself to others, and be excited for everyone else's success, because if you are, they're going to be just as excited when you eventually succeed.
Some great advice, man. Really. No, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to hearing the feedback from the audience regarding this episode, because I think it has been super helpful for people, especially if they're in the investment sales space. So, well, in the meantime, while we wait for some of these questions to come in, I just wanted to ask you: is there any particular question or any insight that you felt like we didn't necessarily highlight in this podcast that you wanted to share with the rest of the audience?
Gosh, that is a good question. Um, let's see. Are there any buyers in the audience? I've got a few deals I'd like to pitch them on.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, you may get some feedback, man, at some point. I mean, we do get a decent amount of reach through once the podcast is distributed, because we have Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
mhm.
YouTube, etc. So you may
You know,
definitely get reached out.
it's funny that that's been one of the coolest parts about social media for me, is that, you know, triple net buyers, oftentimes they don't come from, the triple net space. They'll come from, maybe they owned apartments or maybe they owned an office building and they want to do a 1031 exchange and buy something with less management. And the biggest thing I've noticed was that people, when they think of triple nets, like, oh, triple net Tyler, I got this guy, we just sold his apartment,
Yeah.
you know, let me call Tyler and see what he has available for this guy. I just talked to an apartment guy yesterday and his client wants to buy a 7-Eleven. It's okay, great. We're about to be listing one. This is perfect. And so I think that kind of cool crossover, and that's really my goal with this whole thing, is when anyone hears the word triple net, they think Tyler. We got to call Tyler first. I don't need to win every deal, but I at least want to be at the table and have a chance to compete for it.
Definitely. No, yeah, for sure. And we'll make sure to include all your information in the show notes as well. So if you guys are watching this in a podcast format, go ahead in the description. Same with the YouTube as well. So, well, it looks like you may have answered all the questions we have thus far on the podcast. Tyler. Oh, actually, wait. Let's see. Looks like Eli has asked, What is the main part of the business you need to focus on to hit the century mark?
It's a good question, Eli. Um, for me, I don't know if there's one main thing. I think there's probably more like three, and it really is FaceTime with owners. Um, it is generating new business through conferences, getting that FaceTime, social media, getting that constant drip marketing campaign. And then it is, and I think a lot of agents miss out on this. It's constantly staying in touch with clients that you've worked it with in the past who might not have been active for maybe a year, 2 years, 5 years, and just staying on top of them, updating on the market, giving them valuable intel that they may not have already. Um, you know, it's very easy to call someone and just say, "Hey, do you want to sell your building?" Anyone can do that. What's very hard is coming into a call prepared and saying, "Hey, Mike, we haven't spoken in a while. I sold your building back in 2020. Here's an update on the property or the area or the tenant. Wanted to fill you in. How have things been?" That constant touch point, and it's a lot when you grow your business a lot. It's a lot to do that every day. But that's how I plan on getting to 100, whether it's this year or in 5 years. I don't know. But really, the fortune is in the follow up, and that's what I do. I think best.
That's awesome. Great insight. One thing I'm curious about, just kind of thought through this, is regarding the conferences, because I feel like there's a strategy to going to conferences. I think there's a lot of people who end up going to conferences, kind of walking around to the different booths and having conversations, and it doesn't really bear a lot of fruit. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about how you strategically approach the conference
Yep.
circuit so that you can ultimately have the success you've had?
I take conferences so seriously because it really is. I mean, first of all, they're a lot of money to go to most of
Yeah,
these conferences, and second of all, it's a lot of time, right? You being out of the office for that long, maybe taking a flight somewhere else and spending a few days in another city. So take conferences extremely seriously. Do not show up and, go out with your buddies and drink all night and come the next morning unprepared. So what I will always do, and I'll usually start preparing for a conference 30 days before it actually starts. I will get the attendee list, whether it's, 200 people or 2,000 people. And I'm going through each person, going on their website, seeing, is this a person that I can help? Would this person have a benefit of meeting with me? If so, awesome. Let me put them on my list. And hopefully I'll get anywhere between 150 and 250 people on my prospecting list for each conference where I think I can add value to their business. And then I will prospect. I will give every single person a call. If they don't answer, they get an email. If they don't respond to the email, they get another. If they don't respond to that one, they get a third email. They'll also get 2 email marketing blasts with the conference info, my booth number, how they can meet me. So it's just, and they'll get LinkedIn posts, Twitter posts, all of this stuff where if this person is going to the conference and has any desire to meet with me, they will, right? If they don't want to, all right, all good. But by doing that, if it's a 1 day conference like I just went to in San Antonio, I had 20 plus meetings in a day from, 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. just stacked, right? Because I don't want to be the guy walking around from booth to booth with nothing to do because it's such a waste of time. So if I'm going to invest into these, I want to make sure not only am I getting the best possible outcome, but these owners that I'm meeting with, I don't want to waste their time. So when we're having a meeting, I've studied them. I know their business. I know their last transactions. I've got a market report printed out, ready to give them with some helpful comps they might want to see. Maybe we can talk about that. And so it's very strategic. And, usually the day before those conferences, I'll post a video on social media as well. So when those people are walking around, they're like, "Oh, I've seen that guy. Let me say hi." So there is a ton of thought and strategy that go into these, and that's why I think it's so important.
definitely. No, great insight, man. I'm really excited to hear the feedback, and that's something that people who are going to conferences on a regular basis, it's important to be strategic about it in the way that you've approached it, and hopefully they take your advice and make it happen that way. So, Well, Tyler, it looks like like I said, you've answered all the questions. I really appreciate your time. I think the conversation was super, super helpful, and I'm really excited to hear the feedback that we get from the audience. If people want to learn more about you, people wanted to be able to engage with you, if they wanted to get together at a future conference, what's the best way for them to do that?
Anything, hit me up on X or Twitter at triple net Tyler. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tyler Bindi. You can find my email address and cell phone number basically anywhere at this point. So, feel free to reach out if I'm going to a conference basically every month this year. So if you're going to a big ICSC or something, let me know.
Definitely. Yeah, no. And we'll make sure to include that in the show notes. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, go ahead in the description. You'll be able to access that. Same goes if you're listening to this in a podcast format, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Same thing. We'll make sure to include it in the show notes. So, well, Tyler, really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch and following along with your journey. And once you hit that 100 transaction mark of the year, obviously I'll make sure to sing your praises, and I'm really excited to hear you hopefully get to that point sooner rather than later. So.
We'll celebrate together. Thank you
Heck
so
yeah.
much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate your time. And for those of you guys who are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience, and we greatly appreciate the support. Along with that, if you guys like this channel, please leave a 5-star review if you're listening to this in a podcast format, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. The more people that actually listen to this podcast, the more people can get inspired to be able to either take on their first commercial deal, or if you're in a commercial real estate brokerage as well, hopefully you learn a lot more and help and can advance in your career. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.